They said she was too fragile to survive her father's empire. But when the truth buried beneath his fortune came to light, the daughter they underestimated became the woman who destroyed everything and rebuilt herself from the ashes. This is the story of Grace Whitmore, the heiress who turned corruption into courage and proved that strength isn't inherited, it's earned. The rain fell softly over the black umbrellas as the cameras flashed in the distance. The Whitmore family stood before the marble tomb, their faces carved in grief, or at least pretending to be. Grace Whitmore held a single white rose, her trembling hand betraying the calm mask she tried to wear. Around her, the whispers of the press slithered like smoke, questioning if she was strong enough to inherit her father's empire. Ethan Whitmore placed his hand on her shoulder, firm and possessive. "Smile," he whispered through his perfect grin. "They're watching." Grace obeyed, the corners of her mouth barely lifting. Every flash of a camera felt like a knife slicing through the illusion of control. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was silence. The pastor's voice was lost to the sound of thunder. Grace barely heard the words about legacy and power. All she could think about was the image of her father's empty office. Richard Whitmore, the titan of Wall Street, the ruthless visionary, the man she could never impress, was gone. And with him, the last thread of stability in her life. When the ceremony ended, the mourners scattered, leaving behind the scent of rain and roses. Grace lingered by the grave, her dress soaked, mascara bleeding into her cheeks. "I hope you're proud," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Because I'm terrified." For the first time, she realized that grief wasn't the hardest part. It was the weight of expectation left behind. As she turned to leave, a stranger in a dark coat approached and handed her a sealed envelope. No words, no explanation, just the faint scent of tobacco and rain. The front bore her name in her father's handwriting. Grace froze, her pulse quickening. Whatever was inside, it wasn't meant for anyone else. That night, alone in the vast silence of the Whitmore mansion, she sat by her father's desk and stared at the envelope under the lamplight. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a single flash drive and a handwritten note. "Do what's right, even if it destroys everything." The words didn't sound like him. They sounded like a warning or a confession. Grace plugged the flash drive into her laptop. At first, only static and documents appeared, endless spreadsheets, offshore accounts, coded emails. But then, a video file blinked on the screen. She clicked play. Her father's voice filled the room. "This is for Grace. If you're watching this, it means I couldn't fix what I've done." Her breath caught. The man she thought was unbreakable sounded afraid. He spoke of deals with senators, of bribes disguised as donations, of contracts written in shadows. Grace covered her mouth, her heart pounding. Each revelation struck harder than the last. Her father hadn't just built an empire, he had buried it in corruption. And now, the inheritance she'd received wasn't a fortune. It was a time bomb. By midnight, she sat motionless, staring at the screen. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a kingdom of lies. Inside, Grace realized the truth she had spent her whole life avoiding. The name Whitmore didn't stand for power. It stood for guilt. Sometimes the truth begins with a single moment, and one choice can change everything. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what comes next. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, mocking her sleepless night. Grace sat at the breakfast table, untouched coffee cooling beside her. Across from her, Ethan scrolled through his phone, smiling at the headlines. "Wall Street mourns Richard Whitmore." He looked up and said, "They're already talking about appointing me interim chairman. Dad would have wanted that." Grace clenched her fists under the table. The envelope, now folded in her bag, felt heavier than gold. She hesitated before speaking. "Ethan, Dad left me something." His gaze snapped to hers. "What do you mean, something?" She met his eyes. "A letter and files about the company." Silence filled the room, sharp and suffocating. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You shouldn't read too much into that." Dad was paranoid near the end. His voice was calm, but his jaw twitched. Grace knew that look, the one he used when he was lying. "I think he wanted me to see something," she said softly. "Then do yourself a favor," Ethan hissed, "and forget it." Later that day, she returned to her father's study. Dust danced in the light as she replayed his final words. The more she watched, the more she saw a man breaking under guilt. "Do what's right." The phrase echoed in her head like a curse. She opened the folders again, hundreds of documents linking Whitmore Holdings to illegal campaign funds. She felt sick. That night, Grace called Samantha Brooks. Her name had appeared on old photos, a childhood friend turned investigative journalist. "Samantha, it's Grace, I need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before the journalist replied, "Grace Whitmore? Haven't heard that name in years. What's going on?" Grace took a deep breath. "I think my father did something terrible." The conversation was short, cautious, and full of half-truths. Samantha agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown. Grace hesitated before hanging up. Trusting anyone meant danger, but doing nothing meant becoming part of the same lie her father died trying to confess. When she arrived at the cafe, Samantha was already there, sharp, poised, and suspicious. "You look exactly like your father," she said coldly. Grace winced. "That's not a compliment, is it?" Samantha leaned in. "Not lately." Grace slid the flash drive across the table. "I need you to see what's on this. But if I'm right, it could destroy everything." Samantha's expression softened. "Then maybe it should." Grace stared at her reflection in the window, a woman people saw as weak, naive, fragile. But inside, something was changing. Fear was giving way to fire. And for the first time in her life, Grace Whitmore didn't want to be protected. She wanted the truth. Grace woke before dawn, haunted by her father's trembling voice. The flash drive still sat on her desk, a small object holding the weight of empires. She opened the curtains and watched the city below, men and women rushing toward buildings her father once owned. The skyline shimmered with deceit. For the first time, she understood that every glass tower was a reflection of his ambition and his sins. At breakfast, Ethan was already on a call with the board. "The market's reacting well to Dad's passing," he said casually, sipping orange juice as if he hadn't buried their father 2 days ago. Grace stared at him, her stomach tightening. "You talk about it like it's a merger," she muttered. He glanced up with an icy smirk. "In this family, death is a merger." She excused herself, retreating to her father's study. The faint scent of tobacco lingered, the same smell as the man who handed her the envelope. Grace opened another file. Payments. Shell companies. Names she recognized. Senators, judges, lobbyists. Each revelation burned through her chest like acid. Her father hadn't been framed. He had built an empire of manipulation, brick by brick. Her phone buzzed. A message from Samantha. "I verified some of the files. They're real. You're sitting on something huge." Grace stared at the screen, torn between fear and duty. She wanted to hide, to pretend none of this was true. But deep down, she knew running would make her no better than Ethan or the man her father became. That night, she dreamed of her father standing in the rain, whispering, "Do what's right." When she woke, the air felt heavier. The weight of the Whitmore name pressed on her like a crown of lead. Grace walked to the mirror and studied her reflection, the soft eyes, the trembling lips. Everyone saw weakness. But something inside her had begun to move, small and quiet, like a flame learning to breathe. By the end of the week, whispers had become headlines. Whitmore Empire under investigation. Heiress Grace Whitmore linked to hidden files. The press surrounded the mansion gates, cameras flashing, voices shouting her name. Grace stood by the window, heart pounding. The world wasn't asking for the truth, it was demanding blood, and her brother was more than willing to feed them hers. Ethan called an emergency meeting with the family lawyers. "We deny everything," he said sharply, pacing across the marble floor. "Grace doesn't know what she's talking about. She's been unstable." Grace froze. "You're calling me crazy?" He turned, his eyes cold. "Better for them to think that than to know what you're doing." In that moment, she realized Ethan wasn't protecting the family. He was protecting himself. When the lawyers left, she confronted him. "Dad left that message for me," she said, her voice shaking. "He trusted me to make it right." Ethan laughed, cruel, dismissive. "He trusted you because he pitied you. You've always been too soft, Grace. You don't belong in this world." She didn't respond. But something in her eyes, the quiet steel, made him hesitate for the first time. That night, the reporters shouted her name again. Cameras followed her every step. Grace walked through the chaos, her face pale but steady. "No comment," she repeated, voice calm, almost rehearsed. Each flash of light burned away another layer of fear. By the time she reached the car, she realized the truth. They could control the headlines, but not her silence. Inside the car, Samantha called. "They're coming after you hard," she warned. "You need to decide what side you're on." Grace looked out the window, watching the city blur into streaks of gold and gray. "I already have," she said quietly. "If I'm going to fall, it'll be on my own terms." For the first time, her voice didn't tremble. It commanded, and that scared Ethan more than the truth ever could. Grace arrived early at the small cafe on Lexington Avenue, hiding behind dark sunglasses and a wool coat. Samantha Brooks was already there, her laptop open, fingers tapping quickly. When their eyes met, the air shifted past friendship drowned under years of silence. "You look tired," Samantha said. Grace forced a smile. "I look guilty, apparently." Samantha's eyes softened, curiosity fighting caution. They talked in low voices, the hum of espresso machines drowning their secrets. Grace handed over the flash drive, her hands trembling. "I need to know if any of it's real." Samantha plugged it in immediately, scrolling through the files, her brows knitting tighter with each page. "These aren't rumors," she murmured. "These are crimes." Grace's pulse raced. She had hoped for lies, but the truth was far worse. Outside, the paparazzi buzzed like hornets, but inside that dim cafe, a fragile alliance began to form. "If you go public, they'll destroy you," Samantha warned. Grace nodded. "They already are." Her voice carried a quiet defiance, one that startled even herself. She wasn't ready to be brave, but fear was losing its grip, one breath at a time. Samantha leaned forward. "Then we do this smart. We investigate, gather proof, and release it ourselves, not through them." Grace hesitated. "You'd help me?" Samantha smirked. "You're a Whitmore. Taking you down would be front-page news. But helping you bring down your own empire, that's history." For the first time in days, Grace laughed, not because she felt safe, but because she finally wasn't alone. As they left the cafe, Samantha whispered, "Be careful who you trust." Grace turned to her. "That includes you." Samantha smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The street outside buzzed with traffic and camera flashes. Grace tucked her hands into her coat pockets, feeling the weight of the flash drive. It no longer felt like evidence, it felt like a key. She just didn't know yet what door it would open. Days passed in a blur of fear and discovery. Grace and Samantha met in secret, piecing together the puzzle of Whitmore Holdings, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, lobbyist payments disguised as charity donations. Every new document added a layer to the rot beneath the empire. Grace's nights grew shorter, her nerves sharper. The heiress who once avoided confrontation was now chasing it. Late one evening, as rain lashed against the windows of her father's office, Grace opened an old file marked "Personal." Inside were notes written in Richard Whitmore's hand-coded instructions, initials, payment dates. The realization hit her like a wave. Ethan wasn't just involved. He had orchestrated much of it. Her father had been trying to stop him and failed. Grace's chest tightened with rage and betrayal. She called Samantha immediately. "It's worse than we thought," she said, voice trembling. "Ethan's behind most of this." There was silence on the line. "Then he won't let you live if you go public," Samantha replied. "You need to be smart." Grace closed her eyes. "I'm done being scared." The line went quiet again, a mix of admiration and fear. Samantha knew the moment had come. Grace Whitmore was changing. The next morning, she arrived at the company headquarters for the first time since her father's death. The boardroom smelled of arrogance and aftershave. Ethan sat at the head of the table, surrounded by executives. "Grace," he said, smiling thinly. "You look well." She placed a folder on the table. "That's the list of illegal subsidiaries. I know everything." The silence that followed was colder than winter itself. Ethan's smile faded. "Careful, little sister," he whispered, leaning closer. "You're walking on glass." Grace met his gaze unflinching. "Then I'll make sure it cuts both ways." As she walked out of the room, the men whispered among themselves not about her weakness, but her courage. For the first time, the empire her father built had a new enemy, and her name was Grace Whitmore. The next week began with whispers in marble hallways. Grace felt them follow her like shadows, every glance a dagger, every smile a lie. Ethan had called an emergency board meeting, and the air reeked of anticipation. As she entered, all eyes turned to her, the unstable heiress, the liability they wanted gone. Ethan stood at the head of the table, charming as ever, the perfect snake in a tailored suit. "Grace," he began smoothly, "we've received troubling information. Leaks, files, your name attached." She tried to speak, but he cut her off. "You've put this company at risk." The words were delivered like a verdict. One by one, the board members nodded, cowards hiding behind protocol. Grace's throat tightened. They didn't want the truth, they wanted silence, and Ethan was giving them the perfect scapegoat. When the vote came, it was swift and surgical. "Effective immediately," Ethan said, smiling for the cameras. "Grace Whitmore is suspended from the board." Her world tilted, the room spinning, as flashbulbs burst like gunfire. She stood still, refusing to cry. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. Ethan's grin faltered for the briefest moment. He wasn't expecting defiance, not from her. Outside, Samantha was waiting. Grace's face was pale, but her eyes burned with quiet rage. "They think they broke me," she whispered. "Then prove them wrong," Samantha replied. The city around them seemed louder, harsher, alive with rumors. Grace looked up at the mirrored towers and saw herself reflected smaller than the skyline, but no longer invisible. That night, she stood before her father's portrait. "You built this," she said softly, "but I'll be the one to tear it down." Her voice didn't tremble anymore. The woman who once hid behind her family name was gone. In her place stood someone her father never expected, someone stronger, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. 2 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mansion. Mr. Harris, the family's elderly butler, stood at the door, his eyes weary but kind. "Miss Grace," he said softly, "there's something you need to hear." He led her into the study, the same room where her father's voice had first broken her heart. From his coat, he withdrew a small recorder wrapped in a silk handkerchief. "Your father wanted you to have this. He made me promise." Grace pressed play, and her father's voice filled the silence once again. "Ethan's become dangerous," he said. "I've made mistakes, but he's gone too far. If something happens to me, don't let him win." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. The man she had worshipped was confessing not just his sins, but his fear. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew what Ethan was." Mr. Harris nodded, his hands trembling. "He wanted to fix it, Miss Grace, but it was too late." Grace stood motionless, the room spinning around her. All the pieces fit now, the fear, the secrecy, the letter. Her father hadn't just been guilty, he'd been cornered. "Thank you, Harris," she said quietly. "You've done enough. I'll handle the rest." The old man bowed, eyes glistening, and left her to the storm she was about to unleash. That night, Grace played the recording over and over, memorizing every word. She could almost feel her father's guilt, his regret seeping through the speakers. For a long time, she had blamed him for everything, but now she realized the true poison had always been Ethan. Her fear hardened into purpose. The time for mourning was over. Before dawn, she called Samantha. "I have proof," Grace said simply. "And this time we go public." Samantha hesitated. "Once you do this, there's no going back." Grace looked out the window as the city lights faded into sunrise. "I don't want to go back." Her reflection in the glass was no longer that of a frightened heiress, it was that of a woman ready for war. The morning Grace decided to act. The city was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a warning. She walked into Michael Turner's downtown office, clutching the flash drive and her father's recording. "I'm ready to hand it over," she said. Michael's eyes darted toward the glass wall behind her. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. Grace frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "Why not?" Before he could answer, Ethan walked in, perfectly calm, perfectly poisonous. "You always were predictable, Grace," he said, closing the door. "Did you really think you could outsmart me?" Her heart froze. Michael stood between them, guilt written across his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "He threatened my family." Grace took a step back, realizing too late that the meeting was a setup, the trap already sprung. Ethan extended his hand. "Give me the files and maybe I'll let this go quietly." Grace stared at him, the same man who once helped her learn to ride a bike, now offering her ruin in exchange for silence. "No," she said simply. "You can't bury this." Ethan's smile faded, revealing the man beneath the charm, cold, hollow, desperate. "You've just destroyed yourself," he hissed. "Maybe," she replied, "but I won't destroy anyone else." The next morning, headlines exploded. Grace Whitmore accused of corporate sabotage. Heiress suffers emotional breakdown. Photos of her leaving the building circulated online, pale, terrified, her reputation shattered. It was exactly how Ethan wanted her to look, weak, unstable, defeated. But behind that picture was something no one saw: a woman who had finally stopped running. In the days that followed, Grace disappeared from the public eye. Samantha couldn't reach her, and Ethan celebrated his victory. But while the world believed Grace had crumbled, she was quietly gathering her strength. In a small apartment downtown, she replayed her father's recording, her eyes dry, her voice steady. "He's taken everything," she whispered to the empty room. "Now I take it back." The trap had closed, but not on her. Weeks passed before Grace resurfaced. The media had moved on to newer scandals, but whispers of the mad Whitmore heiress lingered like smoke. She spent her days reading, studying, rebuilding every piece of evidence Ethan had buried. Samantha finally found her thinner, sharper, different. "You look like hell," she said. Grace smiled faintly. "I'm becoming someone who belongs here." The timid girl from the mansion was gone. Together they began reconstructing the case from scratch. New witnesses, hidden accounts, recovered data. Grace's mind, once clouded by fear, now worked like a machine. "You're doing it," Samantha said one night. Grace didn't look up. "No," she replied, eyes fixed on the screen. "We're doing it right this time." For the first time in months, her voice carried conviction instead of doubt. Then came the unexpected call. Michael Turner wanted to meet. "I was wrong," he said over the phone. "I can help you." Grace hesitated. Trusting him once had nearly ruined her, but something in his tone sounded different. They met in a quiet park after dark. Michael handed her a folder of documents. "Ethan's running scared," he said. "He's moving money, fast." Grace took the folder, her jaw set. "Then it's time to end this." That night, Grace barely slept. Every moment of humiliation, every insult, every whisper calling her weak, they all fused into something sharp, unbreakable. She no longer wanted revenge, she wanted justice. When dawn came, she stood at her window, watching the city stir to life. "You taught me to be quiet," she murmured, thinking of Ethan. "Now it's your turn to listen." Her reflection in the glass didn't flinch. By morning, she was back in motion. Samantha assembled a team of legal experts, whistleblowers, and journalists who'd lost everything chasing truth. Grace stood before them, composed but fierce. "We do this clean," she said. "No leaks, no deals, no compromises." The room fell silent. In that moment, no one saw a fallen heiress, they saw a leader. And for the first time, Grace Whitmore wasn't following her father's legacy. She was rewriting it. The office Samantha had rented downtown smelled of burnt coffee and determination. Papers covered every surface, and the glow of computer screens lit Grace's tired face. Her hands trembled as she signed another affidavit, but her eyes were steady. "We have everything we need," she said, her voice low but certain. The walls seemed to hum with quiet energy, the calm before the storm. Whistleblowers began stepping forward, drawn by her courage. Former employees shared evidence of bribery, blackmail, and political manipulation. Grace listened to each of them carefully, her compassion cutting through their fear. "You're safe now," she would say, even when she wasn't sure she believed it herself. But the more she spoke those words, the more real they became for them and for her. Michael Turner worked beside her again, this time without deceit. He avoided her eyes at first, weighed down by guilt. "You don't have to forgive me," he said one night. Grace looked up from her papers. "I already did," she replied. "I just won't forget." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was resolute. Michael realized then that Grace had become something her father never was, both powerful and kind. Each day brought new risks, anonymous threats, broken locks, strange cars parked outside, but Grace no longer hid from danger. She moved through it. "They're scared," Samantha said one evening, watching the headlines pile up. "Good," Grace replied. "They should be." Her confidence spread through the team like fire, igniting belief where doubt once lived. The weak girl was now their general. By the end of the month, the case was airtight. Emails, recordings, bank transfers, everything pointed to Ethan. Grace gathered the team for one last meeting. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go public." The room went silent, everyone holding their breath. "Are you ready?" Michael asked. Grace smiled, not nervously, but with quiet certainty. "I've been ready since the day they buried him." The morning of the press conference, Manhattan felt electric. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their cameras glinting under gray skies. Inside, Grace stood before a mirror, adjusting her black blazer with trembling hands. Samantha placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. Grace met her eyes in the reflection. "I do. If I don't, no one ever will." As she stepped onto the courthouse steps, the noise hit her cameras flashing, voices shouting, the air thick with tension. Ethan watched from a nearby balcony, his expression unreadable. Grace's heels clicked against the stone as she approached the podium. For a brief moment, the crowd's roar faded, and all she could hear was her father's voice. "Do what's right." Then she began to speak. Her words were clear, deliberate, and devastating. She exposed every secret her father's empire had hidden, the offshore accounts, the political bribes, the threats. She didn't shield Richard Whitmore's name, nor her own. "The truth belongs to everyone," she said, her voice unwavering. Reporters froze. The world that once mocked her now hung on every syllable. Ethan's fury erupted behind closed doors. He called investors, lawyers, and journalists, trying to spin the story. But it was too late. Grace had gone live. The video was already spreading online, millions watching, as the daughter of a legend dismantled his empire with nothing but truth and courage. For once, silence fell over the Whitmore name, not from power, but from respect. As Grace left the courthouse, rain began to fall again, washing over her like absolution. She looked up at the gray sky and smiled faintly. The flashes returned, but this time she didn't flinch. "How does it feel to lose everything?" a reporter shouted. Grace paused before answering, her voice calm and strong. "I didn't lose everything," she said. "I just stopped pretending I had it." The conference had ended, but the storm was only beginning. Every news outlet in America replayed Grace's speech, dissecting her every word. Supporters called her brave, critics called her a traitor. Ethan, cornered and desperate, gave his own statement full of lies, denial, and rage. But the tide had already turned. The truth was out, and for the first time the Whitmore name was no longer feared, it was being judged. Grace sat in Samantha's apartment, watching the chaos unfold on television. "You did it," Samantha said quietly. Grace didn't answer. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. Victory felt hollow, like surviving a war only to realize the battlefield was her life. "They'll come after me now," she murmured. Samantha nodded. "Then we'll face them together." Grace gave a small, tired smile. "No, this part I do alone." Outside, protesters gathered, some chanting her name, others calling her a liar. Grace walked past them without a word, her expression unreadable. Inside the courthouse, she submitted the final evidence packet herself, handing it to federal agents. "Make sure it doesn't disappear," she said firmly. One of them replied, "You've started something you can't stop." She looked back, her voice steady. "That's the point." Ethan's world crumbled overnight. His assets were frozen, his allies turned on him, and warrants flooded in. When he tried to flee the country, he was arrested at the airport. The image of him in handcuffs became the symbol of a fallen dynasty. Grace watched the footage just once, then turned it off. She didn't need revenge, she needed peace, and for the first time it felt possible. That night, she stood on her father's balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. Grace closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "You were wrong, Dad," she whispered. "Power doesn't protect people, it destroys them." Her reflection in the glass showed a woman reborn, no longer the daughter of a titan, but the author of her own redemption. Weeks turned into months, and the empire her family built was dismantled piece by piece. Grace sold the mansion, donating most of the profits to legal aid programs for whistleblowers. The press followed her everywhere, eager to catch her broken or bitter, but she gave them nothing. Each time they asked for a statement, she simply said, "The truth speaks for itself." And it did louder than any fortune ever could. Her once perfect image had vanished from glossy magazines. No designer gowns, no black tie galas, no carefully crafted smiles. Grace lived quietly in a small Brooklyn apartment, cooking her own meals, walking to the park unnoticed. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in store windows, not the fragile heiress she used to be, but a woman comfortable in her own silence. Freedom, she realized, was heavier than gold, but infinitely purer. Michael visited one evening, bringing old case documents. "It's over," he said softly. "You've done more than anyone thought possible." Grace poured him coffee, smiling faintly. "It's never over," she replied. "Corruption doesn't die, it hides." He nodded, studying her face. "You've changed." Grace looked out the window. "No," she said, "I just stopped pretending to be small." The world slowly began to change too. Laws were proposed in her father's name, not to honor him, but to prevent others like him. Her courage had sparked something larger, something real. Every time she saw new headlines about accountability, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't destroyed the Whitmore legacy. She had rewritten it. Late one night, Grace sat alone at her kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her. The city outside was peaceful, almost forgiving. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm still here." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had survived. For the first time in her life, Grace Whitmore didn't feel like the daughter of anyone. She felt like herself, and that was enough. The morning light spilled through the windows of a lecture hall at Columbia University. Grace stood before a room full of students, speaking about ethics and power. Her voice, once uncertain, now carried calm authority. "Integrity isn't a gift," she said. "It's a choice one you make when no one is watching." The crowd listened in silence, captivated not by her past, but by the woman she had become. After the lecture, reporters waited outside, respectful now, not predatory. One asked, "Do you ever regret exposing your father?" Grace paused, the question lingering like smoke. "I regret that he lost himself before I found who I was," she replied softly. It wasn't bitterness in her tone, but peace. She no longer fought her father's shadow. She had outgrown it. Her truth had set them both free. That evening, she walked through Central Park wrapped in a long beige coat. The city hummed around her, familiar yet new. A man approached, tall, composed, with a quiet confidence. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "David Carter. I represent a group of investors who believe in ethical entrepreneurship. We'd like you to lead it." Grace studied him, a spark of the old ambition flickering in her eyes. For a long moment she said nothing. The skyline glittered behind her, not a symbol of greed anymore, but of possibility. "If I do this," she said finally, "it'll be on my terms. No hidden agendas, no lies." David smiled. That's exactly why we came to you. Grace nodded slowly, feeling the pulse of purpose return. The world had taken everything from her once now. It was offering her a blank page. Later that night, she sat by her window, looking out over the city her family once ruled. The wind rustled through the curtains, carrying the faint echo of her father's words. "Do what's right," Grace whispered back. "I did." A small smile curved her lips as she turned off the lights. The empire of deception was gone, but in its place stood something greater. Not Whitmore Holdings, just Grace Whitmore, stronger than her name, brighter than her past, and finally free. Grace Whitmore lost everything the world told her was power, and found the one thing they could never take herself. Would you have done what she did? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one of them. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs strength today, and subscribe for more powerful stories of redemption, courage, and truth.